Receive and transmit. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, everybody. This is Peter. I'm subbing in for Tom Williams today. He had a problem technically. He couldn't make it. So I've got a whole disorganized list of things to run through here for the next hour. But should be good, though. I think there's a lot of important points. And given feedback I've been getting for the past few months on a number of different issues, it's a good time for me to clarify a number of things. So I hope everyone's doing well out there, and I apologize. I've been kind of out of the loop a little bit, at least. Well, radio shows have always been my territory, but we're trying to get that extended out, and I think it's been very effective so far. I really enjoyed listening to Cliff and Ben and Federico, and it's just great to see new blood out there, if you will, bringing this along from different perspectives, and that's, of course, very important. So let's see here. Today I want to run down, I want to kind of back up a little bit, and we're going to talk about the Zeitgeist Movement's purpose for those that might be new, the Zeitgeist Movement's form, the scientific method of thought and what that actually means, because science has become kind of this buzzword out there where people really just, they don't even understand what it comprises that. It's an isolated institution for many. Building upon that, I want to talk about the reasoning that arrives at a resource-based economy, both from problem resolution and from what I call natural law, where you essentially you're deriving, inferentially deducing, probably more accurately, patterns of behavior that actually work. Imagine that. Then we'll talk about projects that we're doing. There's a lot of stuff coming up. Then basic updates with content revisions, the websites, and then depending on how much time I have, I'm going to run down a series of points that I had been developing for a while, which actually was building upon the Why I Advocate campaign, which is still in existence, by the way, even though it's been distracted at the moment. For those that are familiar with that, you can go to the zeitgeistmovement.com, and on the left sidebar, you'll find a link for Why I Advocate, and we've had many, many, many wonderful submissions posted on video blogs. Essentially, it's a video blog submission process, submission experiment, to listen to people and why they feel a resource-based economic model is viable in their own words, which is important. So, let me see here. I'm going to jump right into the Zeitgeist Movement purpose. Ever since the Venus Project split, a lot of people out there have shown gestures of confusion, as far as what we're actually advocating, and it's a little disheartening to see that because it shows that there was a loss of train of thought as to what it really means to be a part of the Zeitgeist Movement. Obviously we advocate the resource-based economic structure as a solution, and there's huge, tons of material that we put out with respect to that. And if you're new, again, our orientation, which is being updated, but still stands perfectly on its own. We're just complying more with Venus Project recommendations as far as, how we're representing. But the train of thought doesn't change whatsoever. So reading the orientation guide, watching the orientation video, watching the lectures by myself and Ben McLeish and others, which are posted, this really should be the nail in the coffin for many out there that haven't taken the time or haven't really been informed as to the dramatic structural problems that exist with the social organization that we have today and the results and consequences of that, which essentially are an assault on public health as a whole and can only lead to further social, economic, environmental, ecological collapse, etc. This is all there, so I hope everyone will continue to learn about these things. But at a more fundamental level, the purpose of the movement is not just about moving towards, a fixed institution, a set of concepts and solutions that seem to be isolated and defined. It's really about the method of thought. This is about getting people to think in a particular way about their relationship to their environment. This is it seems so obvious, doesn't it? But unfortunately, it isn't dominant whatsoever in the world we live. It isn't taught in the educational system. No one's learning basic processes as they develop, and instead they learn about institutions, and they create these narrow associations and interlinkages that really doesn't think, if you will. There's no thought process to it. So the Zeitgeist Movement operates on multiple levels invariably. You can't just have the advocation of a particular system. You have to show people why that's important. So the scientific method of thought is really a worldview. You can go back through human evolution, and what do you have? You have people trying to figure out what's going on. The ultimate informer, if you will, historically has been, of course, the stellar sky. That was the calendars. That was how people navigated the seasons during the agrarian revolution, agricultural revolution. That is how they timed things. Watching the stars in their seemingly fixed positions was an incredibly informative thing, and that was where we started to base all sorts of ideas on, from metaphysics, astrology, relationships of life. People wanted to have that connection to the cosmos. A great artistic way to describe these types of things in development is the work of Carl Sagan, where he is an astronomer. He does a lot of great philosophical views on how the evolution of this sort of interconnectivity and patterns of thought and relationship occurred through human evolution. Somehow astronomy became mixed in with astrology, which is easily debunkable because there's nothing fixed in the night sky. It's impossible for there to be such relationships. But on the appearance level, and of course on the poetic level, that connection is great. But on the appearance level, this is the way human thought moves. It sees surface associations and it thinks that that's the end all. And that's the flaw, is it's not emergent. And most thought processes are not emergent at all. Hence, we still have belief systems, belief being, faith being belief without evidence, in a singular proposition. That's pretty much all it is. And that faith isn't just religious. It extends to the political system. It extends to the monetary system. It extends to all sorts of forms of social relations. It's setting up its own taboos. And the world you have now is this sort of jockeying sort of disarray of all these ancient, archaic, established institutions, both religious, ideological, political, economic, and they lock people in. And people haven't been educated, if you will, to think critically, think in a way that actually takes in evidence, in a way that actually denotes research, to see beyond the institutions that are around them. So I've talked a lot about that before in the past, and it's nothing really new for anyone that's familiar with the movement. But these presumptions, these givens to society, what need to be overcome, and that's where the scientific method of thought originates. And again, it's multifaceted. The biggest attacks that we have as far as taboo would be, the communist, socialist, even people extend it to fascist. These are the labels that we get because of the social imposition, because of the taboos, the thoughtless taboos, and the assumptions that go along with that regarding historical atrocities and things like that are imposed upon us in a prima facie type of way. No different than, say, race relations back in various civil activism periods, like the American civil rights movement, Dr. Martin Luther King, Malcolm X. King was called a communist simply because he was trying to get the races to come together. And apparently anytime you get anyone to come together, you're a communist or a socialist, and hence, boom, you get all the labels and impositions that go along with that. And it's been very, very effective to stop people and to maintain this sort of feudal structure that we have today. So that tangent aside, the scientific method of thought is the ultimate challenge of that. And it's the arrival at conclusions based on research and what works. And it's the most pivotal, probably even the most pivotal spiritual relationship and understanding you could possibly come up with, because it actually is what's true. You have a whole subculture of people out there that call themselves truth seekers. I'm sure you've heard this stuff. They usually relate it to what's happening in their governments and things like that, the truth seekers. Well, if you want to be a truth seeker, pick up a book on physics. If you want to be a truth seeker, you have to actually understand the physical world on some level. So you don't have to be a genius at it, but man, if you don't see those associations, if you don't have a basic understanding of biology, evolution, physics, you're not even remotely related to truth on any particular level. You don't even know what comprises you, what made you, and how you're interconnected. So all that stuff there gives us this process of scientific discovery, which is now the new navigating force, and which is exactly what a resource-based economic arrives at. That's what comprises it. And I hope that's very, very clear. So understanding this process of evaluation, of comparison, of testing, of basing things explicitly on research and validating that research on multiple levels, this is the method that defines the way we view the world, and this is the pattern that we have to grab onto and run with in order to create an environment that, quote, works. It's about doing what's right, and that definition of what's right is based on research that's proven that holds up through time. So at a basic level, the Zeitgeist Movement is an advocation of this train of thought, which is why a lot of people in the Venus Project situation, to bring that up again, they didn't understand that. They don't understand that the Venus Project is an institution. It's an amalgam, and a brilliant one at that, and a very important one as far as what's needed right now, as far as public perception, to make it simplified. But it's simply an amalgam. Jacques Fresco, Buckminster Fuller, Nikola Tesla, even Albert Einstein, Hawking, Carl Sagan, all of them walking the same type of line. And there's numerous others out there, too, that go probably unnoticed, that are continuing these elements of research, and hopefully in a social way, because that's really where the dire need is. The last area of human society that isn't really affected by the responsible scientific method of evaluation and approach is the social system. And this is where the Zeitgeist Movement comes in. So I could go on a long tangent in multiple levels with this, but I hope that's very clear. The very core point is developing processes of thought that people can relate to, that people understand, and they build upon. And then hoping that all of that comes together with a rational awakening. My God, a renaissance has to occur fairly soon with respect to how we organize ourselves. And as I might get to a little bit later regarding the flaws of the system I have in this gigantic list, I'll make that a little bit more clear, but I want to keep moving on here. So the Zeitgeist Movement isn't here just to show solutions in a fixed sense. It's there to highlight the need of this kind of worldview. You can give someone a fish to eat, but if you teach them how to fish, then they're good to go. We all know that. We all know that metaphor. Now, more specifically, the resource-based economic model. What is this? Did someone just conjure this up? Did Jacques Fresco just conjure this up? Did ancient societies who had similar patterns of thought conjure this up? Did Buckminster Fuller's ideas of integrated systems approaches and what he called spaceship Earth, very, very brilliant philosophical disposition? Are these notions just invented out of thin air? No, they come from two angles fundamentally, from natural law, meaning observation of natural phenomenon, and from problem resolution, which is temporal. So, as I describe in Zeitgeist Moving Forward, or even the lecture Where Are We Going, I believe, there's that Project Earth section, which is a very, very simplified view of thinking about the Earth as a holistic system and building an inferential assessment from that as to what it means to be sustainable over generational time. That should be clear to anyone that's followed the movement. If you haven't seen any of those things, I suggest you do. But the issue of problem resolution is another angle, because when you analyze the poverty, when you analyze the ecological collapse, when you analyze energy crises that are not moving forward with proper resolutions, even though we have outrageous amounts of solutions that could be applied right now, almost virtually overnight. You could easily have a government subsidy, for example, to take all car manufacturers and have them do the conversions to battery technology immediately, because the attribute of the automobile doesn't change that much. It's only a particular area of the engine that's required for that type of update. But it's the establishment that holds it back. And the establishment problems are commonly related to the monetary system of self-preservation and all the things that, again, I might talk about a little bit later with this long list I have. But problem resolution, if you take any individual problem and you find its root cause, it always comes back to establishment self-preservation on one way or another. It always comes back to the need for people to preserve power, whether it's a corporation, whether it's a political institution. Those psychological issues of reinforcement through money always gravitates towards neuroses of power and even more greed. Statistically speaking, in donations for poverty always come from the lower and middle class. When it comes to the amount of it done per capita, based on, sorry, I'm not speaking very correctly. These stats were put in our orientation. I can't remember. Regardless, more people donate and help others that are of lower echelons of income rather than higher. Why? Because the more money you have, the higher probability you become distorted. The more you want, and this type of self-preservation is psychologically dominant, and this is where the source of many problems come from, and it builds upon ego. So it's that battle of institutional material self-preservation, which builds into the ego self-preservation, and that's again for another larger conversation. But back to my core point of problem resolution, everything points to a resource-based economic model and what comprises it, and the reasoning for it. When you begin to take each problem in its individual source and actually root it down and not just blame people. You can't just blame people anymore. The worst blight of human consciousness now is the idea that everyone else is to blame. No one wants to think of themselves as a product of anything. No one wants to think of themselves as a vessel of this nature that we share. It's too dehumanizing for anyone. To me, it's the most humanizing and profound thing you could possibly come up with. But no one wants to think that way, so therefore causal relationships are removed. And everyone just wants to blame someone else. And this is another neuroses that has to be overcome. And through the scientific view of causality, it can be, once you kind of come to terms with what you are. Not who you are, but what you are. So I'm going to stop there as far as that. I'm already moving very quickly here, 20 minutes in. I want to talk about forms. We talked about purpose for a moment as far as what the Zeitgeist Movement represents. I want to talk about form here. Form is, of course, the structure, internal structure. I did a lecture a number of radio shows back, part of a truncated lecture series that I didn't finish for many different reasons, mainly because the film developed, and I probably should just go back and jump back on that. In fact, I will, but I've just, my time has been usurped a little bit from many different angles. But nevertheless, the structure of the movement is very, very simple. And I noticed that there's a lot of complaint that occurs periodically. And ever since, the dis-ease, if you will, from the Venus Project situation, a lot of people have come out of the woodwork to just complain for just about anything. It's almost become like a pattern, like a trend. And the main thing that I want to point out is that our view needs to be external, not internal. If you're not out there doing something, which, by the way, I'll talk about in a second, you have no grounds to complain. I've read countless emails about structural changes and all of this stuff and phobias of leadership and misunderstandings of what coordinators are, not even knowing what teams really do or what it means to be active within this awareness campaign, which is what it is. This is an awareness campaign at this stage. That's all it can be. And the strategy lies in the processes of events, the processes that we utilize to ping the environment and create more awareness for this basic, simple train of thought. That's what we're doing. And it's by far the most complicated thing in the history of any kind of social development. So make no mistake. This is by far the most challenging thing that anyone could ever come up with. It's about unifying the world in a basic train of thought, because that's what has to happen, and that's what the Earth demands. Humanity has to come together and share its resources in a basic way. Technology is moving far too rapidly. We almost destroyed ourselves during the Cold War. We are on the edge of so many different problems right now as a result of the division of society and the need for isolated self-preservation that it's terrifying. And it's unfortunate that many aren't even seeing that because they're so distracted by modern life. And that's, of course, another subject in and of itself, the amazing distraction that continues to deviate. I was just glancing through news today. Half of Americans don't even have $2,000 in savings for an emergency. Half of Americans don't have any type of emergency fund for anything. And that's amazing for the, quote, wealthiest country on the planet, supposedly, even though it's a debtor nation. But if you turn on the news and you see these facades, and you see the facade of society, that's what it is. And the depictions are never of what's actually happening. Depictions are the ideal is that represents the ideal. And anyway, so that's, again, another tangent. Coming back to structure, though, it's about engaging the community. The purpose of the movement is very clear, as I pointed out. We have members. What is a member? Does it mean you have to sign up for something? Not necessarily. An abstraction, a member is simply someone who takes this basic train of thought and spreads it to others. You don't even have to have a Zeitgeist Movement association. You don't even have to have a Venus Project association. It's about understanding the basic train of thought, about solutions being derived empirically, about understanding the attributes of society that will create true sustainability, both personal, ecological, social, to increase public health. All this information's out there, and I don't have time actually to run through the gamut of that. But to be a member of this doesn't mean there's no such thing as an ex-member or a member. There's people that understand it, and there's people that don't, and that's about it. As far as chapters, what is a chapter? A chapter comprises what members come together and hopefully as a team work to create programs. The validity of any chapter is not only for a general presence in a particular country or a region, but it's what that chapter does, obviously. So when chapter meetings occur, it's about what you're planning to do to engage the environment and to help others in some way as well, because we're moving now into doing some more charity-based stuff. The Zeitgeist Media Festival, which I'll talk about in a second, will be a global food and clothes drive, or variations of that depending on the region that you're in and what's available to you. So your chapter orientations, for those of you that are in chapters, and by the way, if you're not engaging in a chapter, though, you really should be. That is where the first level of activity is. Even though you could be isolated and still promote this on your own, I do strongly suggest that you would join a chapter. That's really the defining issue. And from chapters comes the projects. The creativity of your work within the chapters is about defining projects and sharing those project concepts on each new tier. If you read our About page, there's an entire section on structure, and there's a reverse hierarchy in play here where from the lower regions upwards, each coordinator will bring new data that's reached by rational consensus from each group to the next highest level, and it's about programs to affect the world, to affect awareness. This is very simple. I state this over and over again because people are losing the simplicity here. And there's infighting, there's little things that are occurring, questioning of integrity of coordination. Coordinators are not in positions of leadership. Coordinators are there to simply assist the spread of information. I have a global coordination position. My work, my focused intent is on content development and program development, and that's basically what I do. That's my role. That's what I do best as well. I'm trying to write, produce as much media as I can. I'm not a chapter coordinator, and as many know, I do very little when it comes to what other chapters are doing, except maybe present new structural ideas like these town halls, which I'll talk about in a second. And then we have teams. Teams are not necessarily related to chapters, though they certainly are a part of it. They certainly affect chapter structure and what the chapters do more specifically as projects. Teams we have the linguistic team, we have the developers team, we have the newsletter, PR, news team, which is a new website that's being developed, by the way, which will enable user submissions, news postings. I do want to state that as a member of the movement, we're all eyes and ears here, and there's two levels to, I think, information relay that's important. We have the problem observation, the societal breakdown, keeping in touch with what's actually happening, and sometimes you have to dig deep to see what's actually happening, and then making that publicly available, whether it's through the forum. But frankly, in my view, I want there to be a news section added to the zeitgeistmovement.com, where it's submitted through this newsletter site, new posts, like the observation about half of Americans not having any savings whatsoever for an emergency. These are important things to keep pinging the community with, and these also culminate into press releases that can be written by our authors, and of course extended to newsletters and things like this. So the problem observation is very, very important because it keeps people apprised of what's actually happening and the rate of change with respect to different problems. The other level is solutions. What the Zeit News, for example, zeitnews.org, tremendously well-maintained and amazing data. We're trying to get some RSS stuff happening on the main global site with this. And what it is about socially relevant technological advents that can solve poverty, that can make advanced agriculture. It can be the most sustainable, conservative, and strategic when it comes to the use of resources. There's so much amazing science out there that has such powerful social ramifications. But unfortunately, they're hindered by the established system. And I don't need to go on that tangent either, because if anyone's listening to me speak, that's the majority of what I've talked about. So we do have the technology team, back to Teams, which is Zeit News, headed by Douglas Millett, and we have our lecture team, and that brings me to the town hall issue. Banners posted on the zeitgeistmovement.com, a bulk email was sent out with respect to this too. Once a month, ideally, it would be tremendous to see every chapter, every region, do something that engages their local community. You can go to the town hall link on the website and read more about this. But this is the new level. There are many Z-Days, if you will. I'm going to be spearheading this with the Los Angeles chapter, and we'll be doing a live webcast of this next month. It will be a pretty big deal just because this momentum needs to be set forward. We're going to limit the audience probably to just 200 because I want it to be intimate. And this hopefully will develop its own momentum with all of you that are involved in chapters. If you want to learn more about it again, as far as budgetary issues, as far as suggestions, please go to the link that's the article that was created for that at the zeitgeistmovement.com and read about it because I don't want to belabor it. But this is very, very important. The town halls, the Zeitgeist Media Festival, and Zeitgeist Day, I think structurally are the three core public engagements that the Zeitgeist Movement works with. And this is really what defines the integrity of your work and your chapter's work, because it really is about the external approach. It's time to get off the internet a bit. Granted, it moves in multiple layers. Every time you have these events, it's very important that you document it through your chapter site. You get them on the video sites. You get any press that you have up there as well. This continues creating the effect of the movement in public perception with its growth. And that's, again, I can't speak about that enough. Public perception is obviously critical. No one takes people seriously in this culture unless they reach a certain stature in public perception. Unfortunately, that's the kind of sheep mentality that's out there. But, what can you do? You have to just simply understand that current sociological pattern and utilize it, unfortunately, even though you'd hope that people could simply think for themselves and see the merit without having validation from the people around them. That's just not the way things work at this time. So town halls, Zeitgeist Day, and Zeitgeist Media Festival. Now, the Zeitgeist Media Festival, that's developing in a very large way for the main event in Los Angeles. Canada is doing a tremendously good job as well with their work. There's going to be a number of updates to that coming soon. I'm in talks with numerous levels of talent, both large and small, local and international, and we'll begin this submission process. If anyone has an event that they're working on, you can go to zeitgeistmediafestival.org and send a loose email regarding what you're doing, and then we're going to develop the mapping structure similar to what we did with Zeitgeist Day. There'll be much more data as far as suggestions and developments, and of course, maybe even regional links to the charity organizations. There'll be a lot of feedback with this when it gets the momentum that I'm expecting on the website. So please check back to that and begin thinking about that too. The Zeitgeist Media Festival, for those that aren't familiar, is the aesthetic concept that pairs in with the Zeitgeist Day and even the Zeitgeist Town Halls. It's about creating a feeling. Art has always been the most powerful form of communication. If it wasn't for art, you wouldn't have a Catholic church. You wouldn't have religion. You wouldn't have a lot of things if it wasn't for the aesthetics that are put forward that are surrounding the intellectual or whatever, the knowledge that goes along with a particular institution or anything else. This is a very critical role and something I believe in very much. That's why the films are what they are. That's why I utilize, the various aesthetics. And it's important. It's important as a form of communication. Art, the Renaissance really was driven by artists, if you go back, which led to numerous levels of intellectual revision. Art is always the courageous attribute. Art is where the taboos materialize first, and then they slowly permeate and they help to change the culture. All right. So I think I've run down through those issues. I just can't reiterate those important elements enough. If your involvement in the movement is contingent upon how you engage the public around you. And the structure within the movement is so simple. And for those that continue to complain about structure, well, there's always going to be improvements. But unless you're out there doing these basic things, I have a difficult time taking people seriously. That if all you're concerned about is coordination and things that really, to me, are secondary to the very obvious angles that we're working towards, very simple event-based public awareness campaigns that we're working towards, which require very simple and obvious coordination. I'm not particularly interested, even though there are many revisions that I have on my plate regarding how we orient TeamSpeak, regarding how we orient moderation, and other things that I consider explicitly minor, frankly. If the focus isn't external, well, then you might be in the wrong place if your obsession with this in some internal construct. Because it's fine, frankly. It's doing just fine. It's incredible what's been accomplished through coordination. And all you have to do is look at our Z-Day maps and look at what we've done on a global scale in tandem to see how powerful our possibility is. Now, in Brazil, July 25th to 31st, I was invited to the Sin Futuro Multimedia Festival, audiovisual film festival. I think it's the 7th year of this very, very big and very, very unique, impressive organization. They're going to be showing addendum and moving forward, and they want me to participate in 2 talks. One is a political talk that has to do with the effect of art and politics. That's a very general distinction, but it's really interesting what they're putting forward. And the second thing they want to be part of is literally actually a Zeitgeist Movement event. They want to bring in the movement for a Q&A type of environment. None of these specifics have been completely set, but between July 25th and 31st, there will be the screenings, and there will be this political event, which I'll be part of with the roundtable of a lot of other people, and then there will be this focused Zeitgeist Movement event based on what they're describing, which very much surprised me, by the way. They really have an interest, and they're denoting they must be very aware of the Brazilian chapter and what they're doing, but I'm still in communication and development with that. But while I am in Brazil, and I've had some contact with the Brazilian chapter in that region, I will be trying to do some other event secondary to that, unless my schedule is completely wiped out. Some type of smaller event with the Brazilian chapter of a lecture. Maybe we can find a bilingual way to do this. But more information on that. I know out there many people, there's a criticism of me of being the forefront of anything. If you've been tracking my behavior over the course of the past number of months, I've deliberately tried to pull that out because I really can't stand the cult of personality, leadership notions. But I'm going to continue to do what I do, and I decided that I really don't give a shit what anyone thinks anymore. I have my own distinction and feelings of relevance with respect to what needs to get out there. And just as all of us should be operating on our own level, not only in concert with the movement, I'm putting myself out there as I feel is necessary. My notoriety is what it is, and it's existed. As much as I don't like it, as much as it irritates me from the standpoint of it kind of this focus, I have no choice. So I'm putting myself out there. And if people don't like that, well, I don't know what to tell you. As far as other updates, we got a lot of website updates that are going to be happening. We have the website basic redesign and trying to get a more user-friendly interface happening on the global site, and hopefully will permeate to other sites. Two things: the orientation, PDF orientation video, and an introduction to the structure and processes of the movement is coming forward, both in form, like PDF form, and video. So when people come to the site, because it's always been a little bit unclear, unfortunately, when people come to the site, they're able to quickly understand where the chapters are, how to get in touch with the chapters, how to do the basic orientation with the movement, and that's very, very important. So we're going to be doing that. Very, very soon. I have a long list of other data things that I have had to do, along with personal things that I just have been put on the back burner for a long time. But these things are coming up, and I'm definitely looking forward to that. I don't know if I mentioned the newsletter site, but that's coming up soon. I was hoping to get more data on that. But that's another pivotal issue as far as site redesign, because rather than have this sort of kind of haphazard forum structure, which we'll maintain, there needs to be a live news data feed going into the Zeitgeist Movement site about relevant issues at all times, and that's something we've been lacking for a while, and that's part of this kind of larger update that we're doing structurally. And what else do we have? Yeah. Okay. I think that runs down just about everything that I wanted to bring up with respect to changes and issues regarding the movement. I can't reiterate enough that the concentration of focus for the Zeitgeist Movement needs to be external, not internal, and to understand that and to realize that if you understand the perception here, such as Zeitgeist Movement Canada, I really enjoy, if you go to the Zeitgeist Canada and you see their website, you see what their programs are and see the independence that they've put forward, the holographic nature, building upon preset issues, but also using their own creativity. They're not sitting there complaining about things. They are doing things. And I really want to encourage everyone out there to start doing things, because it seems that things are festering a little bit with those that have a little loss of direction. And the Zeitgeist town halls are really what's going to separate those that understand this from those who don't. It's going to be part of the lecture team in part 2. Highly documented. Everyone out there should be recording these things and perfecting your skills of communication. We'll have a lot of presentation materials that will be continually uploaded. There might even be a specific site. Well, actually, no. We have so many sites already. I think it's probably best to keep it internal on the global site as far as materials. But naturally, regional sites can start to carry presentation materials, keynote speeches, different aids that can assist with this. So that's very important, and I won't run that into the ground. So I'm going to go now through, for the remainder of the time, I'm going to go through this list I compiled a little while back with respect to what it basically is, why I advocate, but it's a little more specific than that, regarding problems today and regarding their resolution. All right, here are 21 points. I would say the top 21 points that make the Zeitgeist movements work towards a resource-based economic model valid, viable, necessary, and extremely important. Number one, the current economy is driven explicitly by consumption, not sustainability. Somewhere along the line, the table's tilted. Now we have a system that's not based on just rewarding people for basic labor that has utility. Now we're at the other side of the paradigm, where everyone's engaging in virtually nonsensical labor, or labor that isn't necessary, labor that isn't socially viable, labor that isn't technically necessary, meaning it can be automated with higher efficiency, just because we have to keep people employed. This is simple, yet extremely profound as a basic mechanism of our current society. And the core point that comes to the core word is unsustainable and wasteful. It's sort of like having, if you have a farm and you have only a set number of things that can be grown on that farm, and you have to go out there and constantly consume for the sake of your survival, meaning not just eating it, but actually producing and selling. And the comedy is that you have the farm, but you can't consume it. You have to take it and sell it, and then you get the money, and then you can consume it. This creates a cycle of waste that creates a middleman of sorts that isn't necessary, that's falsely derived. I'm sorry, this is an abstract example. Falsely derived because you have to keep engaging in a fictional process in order to get what you need. And since the entire economy today is driven by maximum consumption, increased consumption, you have to have constant growth in this system to maintain social balance. I mean, we do have the boom and bust. Modern free market economists will tell you that you need the bust. The bust is destructive. The bust transfers wealth from the lower class to the upper class, the banking system. The bust is actually despotic, and it doesn't work in favor. It doesn't reset anything. That's why you have the tremendous wealth gap you do today. So it's an anti-economy that we live in. We have to economize, we have to preserve, and the social system has to be based not on blind consumption for the sake of human sustenance and survival and the continuation of the social system, labor, and everything else. It has to be based on preservation, and we need to be rewarded, if you will, for that preservation and conservation and strategic use and minimization of our use. It doesn't mean everyone has to live, with nothing. It means that you just be strategic. And that's where the abundance arises from if we simply eliminate those areas of waste. A resource-based economy is a steady-state economy, not a consumption-driven economy. The ebb and flow is not based on circulation of money, debt collapse, inflation. It's based on human necessity and understanding, of course, your relationship to things, and that's the most pivotal realization. We live in a fantasy land where everyone blindly is consuming with no thought of what it means over generational time. Number two, building on that, the market system itself is explicitly inefficient as it could possibly be, top to bottom, at the true natural resource level. As described before, competition is really a pattern of wasteful interaction where duplication is constantly occurring for the sake of preserving market share with the illusion that competition creates better goods. It can't. Cost efficiency, which is the core mechanism of competition, is simply inhibiting the ability to create advanced strategic goods that have longevity. You can't maintain an establishment with longevity. That's why most computers die within 2 to 3 years or are so dramatically obsolete without the ability to be updated that they become paperweights anyway. You see nothing about strategic use of enclosures. You see very few campaigns of using the example of computers to turn that computer back in to be updated and recycled. Why? Because all of those forms of efficiency reduce input costs, reduce income, because it's better to just trash and remake. I mean, how many examples have you heard where they say, well, we could repair this, but it's cheaper if you just to go buy a new one, because they've never actually strategized the repairing process, so therefore it's not cost efficient. This is explicitly inefficient on the basic level. The market system is explicitly inefficient. They might claim its efficiency on a monetary level with the money sequence of value as described by John McMurtry, but that's absurd. It's not about money movement. It's about the life ground, as denoted in Zeitgeist Moving Forward. So in a resource-based economy, it's based upon scientific possibility in a sustainable manner. It's about understanding what natural resources are, their physics, how they can be utilized best in a systems approach. And that's why we talk about the global monitoring system, the evaluation systems that can be eventually done through AI regarding physics. It's very obvious. While the technology might not be there yet, which I think actually it is, frankly, it's just not utilized, it's only in pockets, the logic of understanding the most strategic use of resources with preservation and strategies of such in mind is unequivocally empirical when it comes to the interest of survival across generational time. So the market system is the opposite. Number 3, we live in a debt-based system, and it's like a cruel social experiment, isn't it? And it's a constant time bomb that periodically goes off. The debt isn't real. It's a manifestation of a system based on market dynamics where banks charge interest for their own income, and the great flaw is that the interest income doesn't exist. This is just mind-blowing when you think about it, and it begins to explain why the world is in such severe imbalance. In part, market systems to blame too, but why the system is in such severe imbalance as it is today. In a resource-based economy, there's no money, there's no debt. It's designed to meet needs strategically of the population, systematically, within a balanced worldview, not the propulsion of promotion of infinite needs and infinite wants, which again is what drives the consumption. You have to have those values in the modern society to keep people interested in constantly consuming and feeling the need. Without those values, the system would fail, which it's going to. Anyway, number 4, the market model, monetary market model, building upon the prior issues, is, quote, decoupled from every kind of natural order. This is more of a summation. You just can't have the process. It's too haphazard. We've become completely decoupled from what it means to actually survive with these false needs that have been generated. Number 5, labor. Labor today, as discussed previously, I apologize for any overlap here, but I think it's important because each one has a different accent of focus, even though there might be overlap. Labor today is now growing obsolete due to the use of advanced automation. This is a powerful paradigm shift, completely in line with basic economic theory, but yet goes largely unobserved and is in tremendous denial by all economists. I've even heard economists say that automation creates more jobs. That's the most insane thing I've ever heard of. Yes, you can keep inventing new occupations, such as everyone in the future being a lawyer or being an accountant, even though an accountant can easily be automated, and it already is. Abstract notions that relate to social abstractions of thought, usually traditionally based, like law and things like this. Yeah, I guess everyone could do that once other things are automated, but you're just inventing new things that become more and more nonsensical as time goes by. You have people standing at kiosks at airports. You go to airports and you go to these little teeny stores that sell gum. Then you think to yourself, well, you can just put a big box around this and automate the whole thing and actually give the poor human standing behind the cash register, wasting their lives, scanning candy bars for 8 hours a day, absolutely unnecessary. You can actually give them a real life, but that's not what the system is. So labor is going obsolete, and it's a self-fulfilling advent. It's not. You can't maintain employment in a system that rewards the cost efficiency of employing automized labor, which is what all corporations are moving forward with. If you pay attention to this phenomenon in the news, which is another thing that we need to get updated on the site more frequently in this news section I want to talk about, I want to have installed, you begin to see that automation is increasing in speed, as the system begins to suffer more and more because corporations need to save more and more money. It's an inevitability that they automate, and there you have your contradiction of capitalism in and of itself. That pattern is not going to stop, and it hasn't stopped. Every major change of labor has been because of the advance in technology, from the agrarian revolution, the invention of the plow, to the industrial revolution, the invention of the power machine, to basically the service industry thing that we have now, where everything's working in digital interactions mostly. These evolutionary issues are always based on technology. 96% of the Western labor force, if I remember correctly, works in service, and most of those services are luxury-oriented, just building upon new levels that really aren't necessary at all. So, theoretically, you could keep making new labor, but at what point does it become absurd? At what point does it become, why are we even doing this anymore? Why are we demanding people waste their lives in occupations that might just be absolutely invalid and inviable and pointless or just ridiculous? And there's a great deal of that already. Coming from someone who worked in Wall Street and advertising, I can speak very clearly of the absurdity of where tremendous amounts of energy is focused in the labor force for absolutely no legitimate point when it comes to social viability. Number 6, the system itself is simply not designed intrinsically to meet the spectrum of human needs. The biopsychosocial elements that science has discovered that comprises our well-being, our health, the resources that we need, the number of calories, the quality of food, the elements of protection around us. With 1 billion people starving to death on this planet, and that number increasing in the broad view, they might say extreme poverty, they claim, has decreased, but the general poverty has increased. So it's completely moot with the statistics put out by the World Bank and things like this. So the system's not designed to meet. It's based on the socially Darwinistic separation. It's based on some winning and some losing. And that's the definition of inhumanity. You can't have everyone survive in the current system. It's impossible. It's not the way it's set up. It's a win-lose society. It's advanced feudalism, basically. And that's it. Now, number 7. Okay, politics. Politics is just hilarious, isn't it? We have appointed dictatorships of people that have no technical education whatsoever. They position themselves to the public, advertise themselves. Their advancement of advertising is based on how much money they have. Compare the McCain and Obama campaign. Obama destroyed McCain in financing. Boom, you have your next president. That's basically a rule across the board. More than that, it's all based on moral assumptions and traditionalized value comfort zones, if you will. It has nothing to do with anything tangible. Nothing. It's the same stuff they talk about every single election, every year for the past, 70 years. If you go back to history, it's amazing. The same talking points that seem to be relevant. Like we have all sorts of difficult live problems occurring in the world today. And when you see these presidential debates, which you will see in 2012, they don't focus on anything that's actually of a root orientation. Never, ever. It's always rhetoric on top of rhetoric with no tangible direct solutions. If you really demanded something from your political leaders, you would have them literally technically define everything in a peer-reviewed treatment of their approach to revising society technically to resolve the problems of labor, poverty, homelessness, economic collapse, structural corruption. This is what would happen if you had any form of scientific relevance. No candidates do this because it's not based on people actually liking their approach. It's about this haphazard identification with the personality of the issue and the illusions created around them. If I see one more Obama bumper sticker that says hope, I'm going to have an aneurysm, because the mind-locked brainwashing was just so abundant in that, and the sad thing is it was bought hook, line, and sinker. It's all a matter of the speculative wishing with absolutely no technical viability or base in anything tangible. So politics of itself, we appoint these human beings for periods. They become appointed dictators. They, on average, don't have any education. They don't do anything but continue the same system that birthed them, because that's what they promote. So the type of change that's necessary here isn't political, as we've talked about before. It has to be a scientific revolution of thought, a structural revolution of thought, where we begin to delegate and arrive at decisions through advanced means, which, again, comes down to our intellectual understandings, developments of AI, computer calculation is the word. We need to start calculating society, not base it on moral whims and the absurdity of those non-scientific approaches that are still dominant today as we rest at the end of the Dark Ages. Number 8, hopefully I can get through these. I have 7 minutes left. Okay, distribution. Well, this couples back in with the market theory issues. Distribution. Distribution is the most haphazard of angle. Production is bad enough. The distribution is, we have globalization. This is all globalization is a work, well, better yet, all globalization is an imperialistic colonialism to save corporation profit. That's it. That's all it ever was. And it's about abusing other areas for profit under the guise that you're providing services. So, the World Bank ends up destroying some nation through austerity measures because of this self-generated debt collapse that occurs periodically through society. The population dwindles, the population's the population's wealth is absorbed, And then those countries are now ripe for exploitation by the, quote, corporatocracy, as John Perkins points out. This is what's dominant, even though it's not talked about. Everything that you have around you is manufactured across the world. And from an environmental standpoint, it's the most inefficient you can come up with as well. You're burning fossil fuels, transporting things across large distances. We get water from Fiji and strawberries from Guatemala, and China is manufacturing all the components and then shipped across seas. Huge amounts of energy waste. I would love to see a stat that actually denoted how much energy, time, and resources are wasted on all of this transport that easily could be, resource transport, where the resource development and product creation could easily be localized, especially in the modern era we have today. There's no reason why anything can't be localized. This is an echo of colonialistic abuse and exploitation from Britain and India, East India Company. You can go back in time; it's nothing new. Number 9. Actually, I already expressed that in passing regarding the expansion-contraction model of the boom and bust phenomenon that transfers wealth from the poor to the rich. Number 10. Yeah, it's a structurally totalitarian system under the guise of free market, the word freedom. People always say, I want freedom, not socialism. They have no idea what they're talking about. We live in a structurally totalitarianized structure, excuse my redundancy, where your purchasing power is what allows you to be free. So you think you're free, why don't you bounce off somewhere without any money and see what you can do? So the very concept that people have freedom and all the general traditional norms that are built upon the free market fallacy is such a unique trick to maintain the types of oppression that has been dominant since the divinity of kings. Because if you control the power of money, if you're able to manipulate money in and of itself, whether it's the market system or monetary system, and it's not just manipulators like banks, it works on every level of the market monetary phenomenon. From what corporations choose to do to how they cut corners. It's a natural gravitation of the system to structurally control and to limit because it is, of course, based on scarcity. So unless you have a lot of money, there's no such thing as freedom, and that's an important fallacy to point out with respect to this system. And you hear it over and over again. It's unfortunate. If I have a chance later, well, I don't think I'm going to make it to that, but I want to talk about the socialist fallacy. I've been paying a lot of attention to anti-socialist rhetoric recently and this grand insanity that's out there. I mean socialist in a very explicit definition, not patterns historically, but that's probably going to have to be for another time. Number 11, problems are not resolved in this system. They are serviced. GDP, which is the false measure of societal health, is about servicing problems. There's absolutely no intrinsic motivation on the basic conscious or even subconscious level, because I think a lot of this stuff permeates people's subconscious, to resolve any problems. If people don't want a resolution to cancer, you might, but the institution certainly doesn't. It's a huge trillion-dollar industry. The entire medical establishment built upon people being sick and having problems. Thousands, millions of jobs, in fact. Millions of jobs based upon that very notion. When you investigate it, there are plenty of resolutions out there, plenty of environmental shifts, plenty of structural changes to the types of food, processed food we eat, all pointing to better health. But that doesn't keep the economy going. So the sicker you are, the more likely you'll have a job. Number 12, corporate systems are stifling, built upon a little overlap of what I said earlier. Change is the enemy. Change and efficiency the enemy of corporate gain. Simple enough. If you don't believe that, we can do it. Number 13, I'm running out of time. Our system ignores the root causes of socially offensive behavior. This builds upon crime. Nothing in our system is actually targeting why people behave in the aberrated ways, from murder to theft. And if they did, they know that there would have to be massive structural changes. Dr. James Gilligan, Harvard, is the only one that's come close to actually considering these issues when it comes to imbalance, the psychosocial phenomenon that generates, well, in this system, since it's reinforced by materialistic values, there's huge amounts of emotional loss that occur when people see others that have more. And since the system is based on that materialism, lots of neuroses and sicknesses arise from that, from greed to propensities for crime, a lot of things like that. It's very dominant, and of course, it's completely ignored, because to address that is to challenge the entire socioeconomic model, which isn't what is in the interest of, well, most people, unfortunately, because it questions their own identity, sadly, creating emotional pain. Number 14, government as we know it is basically an arcane failure. It's all it is an extension of business. That's all it could ever be in a market system. People seem to think the government is outside of it and that it's a regulatory system. The government can't exist without the taxation, without the lobbying, without everything that comprises its decision-making process in the current model. That is what it is, and in the free market where everything's for sale, the naivety the naivety of objection to say, oh well, that the politician's corrupt. He's taking money and basing his decisions on money. Well, what do you expect? It's a prostitution and parasite system. You can't have it work any other way. The moral fabric is dictated by what's reinforced, and everything is ass backwards with regard to reinforcement. I've got 60 seconds left. Number 15, sovereignty. Sovereignty is purely destructive. It's divisive. It's a round, singular, interconnected world. The protectionist view, the old protectionist view, and this builds upon the socialist fallacy and all the fear of any type of concentration of power. This is very dominant in the culture today. It only creates the need for more protection. Rather than actually work towards global unification, people learning to work together, it seems that the opposite is true, isn't it? It's only grassroots movements that see the light, such as the Zeitgeist Movement and others, that want to see the world begin to share its resources for the obvious reason of reducing conflict and creating sustainability. So the sovereignty obsession, which you hear a lot in the nationalist communities, I get a lot of heat from those people. It's really unfortunate that neuroses can. And I have 10 seconds left, so I'm going to end this right now, and I really appreciate everybody listening. And I will talk to everyone soon, and we'll have Tom back next week, and I'll be back after that. All right, bye.